Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Michael Leister, and I'm the State Crisis Intervention Program Manager at the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. This afternoon, we're going to be discussing the fiscal year 22-23 Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program Act 79 of 2018 Qualitative Research Initiative funding opportunity. During our time today, we hope to address any questions you have about this solicitation, as well as the application process. I'm joined by a few of my colleagues today, including Kathy Buckley, Heather Hewitt, and Sam Cook. As a reminder, the grant opportunity closes on Tuesday, July 9th, 2024, and there are many opportunities to reach out and seek support from PCCD before then, which we'll be covering in our presentation today. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on PCCD's website and YouTube channel once it's available. If you have any questions regarding the presentation or funding announcement, you can enter them in the Q&A box throughout the session, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We cannot hear you, and you cannot unmute yourself to speak, so the Q&A box is how we'll get to questions later. So next slide, please. Thank you. So today we'll start with a brief overview of PCCD. Then we'll dive into more specifics about the Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program, the funding announcement, the application process, and our eGrants application system. Additionally, we'll provide resources on how to ask questions and seek additional support regarding the funding opportunity, answer some frequently asked questions that we have heard from potential applicants so far, and then open it up to questions from you all at the end. So first, a little bit about our agency. The Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, or PCCD, was established in 1978 through Pennsylvania state law and serves as the Commonwealth's Justice Planning and Policymaking Agency. Our mission is to enhance the quality, coordination, and planning within the criminal and juvenile justice systems, to facilitate the delivery of services to victims of crime, and to increase the safety of our communities. We're a relatively small state agency housed within the executive offices with approximately 150 employees across our 4 offices. We are directed by an overarching commission board, which is advised by 7 different advisory committees and 2 training boards. PCCD's responsibilities and programs fall into a number of different areas, including funding and grants, technical assistance, data and research, victims compensation, and training, among other responsibilities. If you're interested in learning more about these areas, I encourage you to check out our website at pccd.pa.gov. So this slide shows a snapshot of what PCCD's grants funding has supported in recent years, with the overarching goal of addressing both emerging and long-standing public safety challenges. Those grants address programs related to gun violence prevention, victim services, school safety and mental health, criminal justice system improvements, youth prevention, addressing the overdose epidemic, a variety of behavioral health and mental health initiatives, children's advocacy centers, juvenile justice system improvements, and law enforcement technology and training. And so we're going to move into a little bit of information about the fiscal year 22-23 Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program. This is a brand new federal funding stream. And if we could go to the next slide, please. And so the Byrne State Crisis Intervention Program, or SCIP, was established by the Federal Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed in June 2022. So that act established new provisions and funding streams focused on addressing gun violence and improving responses to behavioral health crises. The Byrne SCIP program is administered by the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, and it provides formula-based funds to states to implement state crisis intervention court proceedings and related programs and initiatives. So PCCD is the agency responsible for administering the federal SCIP funds. One of the unique requirements of SCIP is that it requires all states to go through a strategic planning process and outline specifically how they'll utilize those funds. So really starting in early 2023, we undertook a comprehensive strategic planning process to identify those priorities for the use of Pennsylvania's SCIP allocation. Next slide, please. And again, so our Pennsylvania SCIP FY 22-23 funding plan, there is a link to the plan that you can click on. Really, the overarching goals of this plan are to advance crisis intervention programs targeting risk factors likely to lead to gun violence, and also implement projects that support emerging issues and priorities. In total, Pennsylvania received approximately $8.5 million, and the SCIP funding plan really provides a roadmap for how those funds will be invested. Specifically for the Act 79 funding announcement, the information in our funding plan is included under Objective 3.1, which is evaluate current implementation of Act 79 of 2018, a law requiring relinquishment of guns and other weapons by domestic abusers by local jurisdictions, and identify strategies to improve implementation. Next slide, please. And here I'm going to pass it off to Kathy Buckley, who is the director of our Office of Victim Services, to talk a little bit more in depth about this funding announcement.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to spend some time over the next several slides just to get into a little bit more information about the content of the funding announcement and what is expected out of this research initiative. So the goal of this initiative is to support a new qualitative research project that's examining Pennsylvania County's implementation of Act 79 of 2018 and to identify strategies that's really going to improve its implementation. Act 79, so what is it? This was a significant milestone for increasing protections for domestic violence victims and survivors. This law includes improvements to Pennsylvania's PFA Act and deals primarily with increased safety provisions related to firearms in both protection from abuse, better known as PFA, and misdemeanor crimes of domestic violence to help prevent domestic violence homicides. Among its provisions, Act 79 significantly shortened the time frame in which weapons relinquishments for a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence must occur from 60 days all the way down to 24 hours, which was significant. The new law also prohibited relinquishments of weapons by abusers to friends and family members, instead to only being able to relinquish the weapons to law enforcement agencies, commercial armories, or a licensed attorney. Act 79 also marked a dramatic shift in practices for courts, victim advocates, as well as state and local law enforcement agencies tasked with implementing the law's provisions. So this research initiative will build on quantitative research already completed by PCCD in partnership with the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. That quantitative research study examined PFA orders and cases after Act 79's effective date using data from the Protection from Abuse database, also known as PFAD. The study also explored the significant impact of Act 79 noted as bullets in this slide, but found considerable variation across counties and cases, including the percentage with relinquishment orders, retrieval rates, and the rate of performing retrievals on the same day or before. So further research is definitely needed to explore the context and drivers of disparate local implementation processes. So next, what we want to do, if we move to the next slide, we're going to really talk a little bit more in depth about the funding announcement itself, since we've covered now what Act 79 is. So first, some important dates to be aware of. July 3rd is the final date to submit questions regarding this funding announcement. So as you go through the funding solicitation, you start working on answering some of the questions that we have, completing sections in e-grants. There's an opportunity for you to submit questions and we'll provide answers. Michael will get into this process a little bit more, but keep in mind that the final date you can submit those is July 3rd of 2024. The deadline to submit your actual applications to PCCD is July 9th. And so they have to be submitted in our e-grant system by that date. After that, all the applications submitted will be reviewed and scored. The recommended application will be presented to the Victim Services Advisory Committee for initial approval at its quarterly meeting on October 2nd of 2024. And then after that, the recommended application will be presented at the Commission's quarterly meeting on September 11th, 2024 for final approval. That will mean the project start date will be October 1st of 2024. So under this competitive solicitation, PCCD expects to fund one grant with a budget not to exceed $500,000 over a 2-year project period. And that 2-year project period spans October 1st of 2024 to September 30th of 2026. PCCD and the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, as Michael had mentioned earlier, will have final approval of all final budgets. After the competitive process is completed, successful applicants should expect PCCD staff to engage with them in finalizing their budgets, which could include the elimination, modification, and/or addition of budgeted items. Once budgets are finalized, PCCD will submit the recommended application for BJA for approval. Now that we've talked about how much funding is available, the length of the project, let's get into who's eligible to apply for this funding opportunity. We are looking for entities with the necessary experience, expertise, and credibility to execute the primary project deliverables that are listed in this funding announcement. So those that are eligible include institutions of higher education, nonprofit organizations, and research agencies and institutions, and this does include for-profit organizations. Now let's dive into what's allowable and unallowable as far as cost and activities are concerned. The eligible expenses under this funding should align with the project's goals, objectives, and the key deliverables that are listed on pages 6 and 7 of the funding announcement. This includes paying for expenses directly related to the activities, management, and coordination of the project. As noted here, you can budget for administrative costs. However, we recommend that those costs only reflect what is essential to the project's implementation. SCIP funds cannot be used for prizes and rewards or other types of monetary incentives, client stipends, gift cards, food and beverage, lobbying, and you can also reference the Department of Justice Grants Financial Guide to identify other types of unallowable cost under SCIP funds. So now we're going to get into the next areas of the funding announcement that deal with objectives, research questions, and key deliverables. So as we noted earlier, the project goal is to evaluate current implementation of Act 79, which again is the law requiring relinquishment of guns and other weapons by domestic abusers by local jurisdictions in Pennsylvania, and identify the strategies to improve it. We anticipate this qualitative research project will help answer key implementation questions and identify recommendations and help inform resource allocations to invest in additional training and technical assistance for those key stakeholders that are responsible for Act 79 implementation. The specific objectives associated with this goal begin on page 6 of the funding announcement. The first objective noted here is that the entity should perform an in-depth qualitative analysis of how certain counties have implemented Act 79. This will provide context to PCCD and IUP's earlier quantitative analysis, including examining local procedures for data collection and input. It's important for, and you see here with objective 2, it's important to engage people and systems impacted by and involved in implementation of Act 79. To that end, the second objective involves evaluating the community level implementation through 5 key perspectives. Those include victims seeking assistance from law enforcement and engaging in the PFA process in cases involving domestic violence with firearms, law enforcement officers responding to domestic violence cases where firearms are involved, victim witness agencies, which are those that are in district attorney offices, and victim service agencies as they help victims navigate the PFA process while also balancing the safety considerations. The judges implementing Act 79's weapons relinquishment provisions within the Pennsylvania courtrooms, and finally, the perspective of the sheriff's offices and law enforcement agencies responsible for retrieving weapons ordered to be relinquished as part of the PFA process. And due to the complexity of the PFA and relinquishment process and the large differences in how it's implemented by the justice system and experienced by victims, this analysis can contribute to understanding how this process is perceived by these stakeholders. So finally, for objectives 3 and 4, for objective 3, we want you to examine the impact of Act 79's weapons relinquishment requirements on victims' perception of their safety and efficacy within the PFA process, including their willingness to seek protection, assistance, and intervention from the justice system. And then finally, with objective 4, recommend strategies for policy and practice changes at the state and local levels based on these findings and in consultation with the key stakeholders most impacted by the Act. So there are 7 key research questions that should be addressed by this project. These questions begin on page 6 of the funding announcement. You should be able to provide a detailed plan for your proposed qualitative research method and activities designed to each of these key research questions. Also, since this project is structured as a cooperative agreement, you should expect to work closely with PCCD staff and their research partners at IUP, including to identify potential counties and based on the quantitative data obtained and analyzed by PCCD and IUP. So over the 2-year project period, there are 2 key deliverables for this project. First, to develop and provide interim study reports from the progress of the research activities and the identification of their preliminary findings. And secondly, to develop and provide a final research report, which should include a summary of key findings, as well as recommendations on what is needed to improve the implementation of Act 79 by the key stakeholders, including the judiciary, prosecutors, law enforcement, sheriffs, victim advocates, and others. So at this point, I'm going to turn things back over to Michael Leister.
Thanks, Kathy. And we're now going to talk a little bit about navigating the application process. And on the next slide, Kathy already talked about this a little bit and gave some of the dates, but really just wanted to emphasize a few things and talk about the multi-phase process from submitting applications until project implementation. So first, obviously, phase 1 is submitting your application in our eGrant system. Once again, the application due date is July 9th, 2024. Once all applications are submitted, we will begin our review and scoring process. Once that process is concluded, the selected application will be sent to the Victim Services Advisory Committee and then to the full commission for their approval. Now, typically, with the majority of our grants, at this point, we would work with applicants to make sure everything is good with the application, get the grant awarded, and we'd start project implementation. One of the unique requirements of the SCIP funds is that we have to get BJA approval for all subgrants. So the addition of phase 4, and this is federal approval. So once the commission approves, we'll still work with the grantee to make sure everything is good with the application, make sure there are no issues in the budget, everything is good on the fiscal side. At that point, we will submit the application to BJA for their approval. Once BJA does approve, then we will award the grant and move on to project implementation. But just want to make sure that everyone is aware that there's that extra step with BJA approval for this funding announcement. So next slide, please. So talking a little bit about the application process. Again, eligible organizations must submit applications using our PCCD e-grant system. Final recommendation of projects will be made following the receipt and review of applications in e-grants. So again, just another reminder, applications are due by July 9th, 2024 in our PCCD e-grant system by 11:59 p.m. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Heather Hewitt, and she's going to talk a little bit about submitting your application in eGrants.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon, everyone. The first step to getting started in eGrants, as you can see here, is to create an account in eGrants, and we do have some links that will take you to helpful guides on our website to walk you through those steps. Once you create your eGrants account, you also want to make sure you register your organization with eGrants. And then once that step's done, you'll need to request roles in eGrants to make sure you have the right users and permissions set up to move forward with your application. So the agency registration, there is a link to the form here. You can also find it on our website under the eGrants icon. Your agency must be properly registered in eGrants if you intend to apply. And then there is a note here, authorized officials are persons with contract signing authority, generally the executive director or head administrator of the agency. So this form, and you'll see that information on the form, and they can be returned to the email address that's listed here. Slide. Thank you. User roles. So access to the agency's grants, there's 6 unique roles. As you can see here, the financial creator, financial reader, program creator, program reader, submission, and user manager. Each role does have its own abilities as listed. You can, if you're, for example, a financial creator, you can view and create fiscal information. If you're a financial reader, you can only view fiscal information. The program side of things, you can view and create program information, or you could view program information. Having the submission role allows you to actually submit applications, modifications, and continuations. And last but not least, the user manager, who actually manages user roles. You can have all 6 of these roles. You could have just the financial side. You could just be the user manager. So that will all depend on how your agency is set up. And just a tip, every agency must register at least 2 users in order to complete their grant application. You will need to have 2 different contacts listed on the grant, and you'll get a better idea of when you start the application, kind of where we're talking there. And back to the user manager, every agency should have one. This is a security role that is allowed to approve role requests, and they maintain existing security for users that are already established within their agency. And we do have a user manager help guide that can be found on our website. And again, agencies can have more than one user manager. That's not a problem. And if you ever need assistance with eGrants, we do have the eGrants help desk. We can be reached through email, through the phone, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then we did also include here some other useful resources just to get you started, to walk you through the application process. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. And I think I'm passing it back to Michael now.
Thank you, Heather. So looking at what's required in the application. So first, just want to note that we strongly encourage you to carefully read and review the written funding announcement document prior to starting your application in eGrants. There is a lot of information included in that funding announcement document that is not in the eGrants system. So please review that prior to starting your application. So once you do start your application, there's going to be various sections that you need to complete. For this application specifically, there are 5 sections that are scored. Those are the statement of problem, project design and implementation, anticipated project outcomes and impacts, capabilities and competencies, and then the budget. In addition to those sections, you're also required to complete an executive summary, as well as a required attachment section, where you'll be required to include any attachments within that section. There are also a handful of other fiscal sections that you'll be required to complete. So again, please make sure all those sections are completed and your application is submitted before 11:59 p.m. on July 9th, 2024. And just a few things on our funding process here at PCCD. So first, I want to make sure everyone is aware that PCCD grants are reimbursement based. So that means that money isn't provided up front for project expenses. If you submit an application and are awarded a grant for $500,000, doesn't mean you're getting a check for $500,000 right off the bat. Our process involves quarterly reporting, and those fiscal quarterly reports are how you get reimbursed for your expenses during the quarter. One important thing to highlight here is that grantees can only receive reimbursement funding for actual expenses approved by PCCD and by the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance. Again, because these or the awarded applicant will have their application approved by BJA, it's important that you stay within your approved budget. We do have the ability to modify project budgets and submit project modification requests. However, we need to go through a formal process. You should not be spending money or requesting reimbursement for expenses outside of what is in your approved budget. In general, grant funds are designed to support projects and program-related expenses, not general operating costs. And then lastly, PCCD funding must supplement, not supplant, existing funding sources and programs. So before we dive into some frequently asked questions, I want to give a quick overview of how you can reach out to PCCD if you still need assistance and don't see your question answered anywhere. So as I previously mentioned, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website and our YouTube channel when it's available. So please feel free to refer back to the information here if needed. You can also email PCCD staff at any time at the email ra-pccd-ocjsi@pa.gov. Any new questions coming into this account will be answered and then posted on our online Q&A page, which is also linked on this slide. We encourage you to check out the Q&A before reaching out because your question may have already been answered. And now moving on to some frequently asked questions. So we have a couple listed here on the next slide. So first, is there a mandated indirect cost rate? So for applicants with a federally approved indirect cost rate, PCCD allows subgrantees to apply an indirect cost rate approved by their federal cognizant agency to their PCCD subgrant projects. PCCD also allows applicants that do not have a current negotiated or provisional federal indirect cost rate to apply a de minimis indirect rate of 10% of modified total direct costs of the project. Costs must be consistently charged as either indirect or direct costs, but may not be double charged or inconsistently charged as both. So if you're choosing the 10% de minimis indirect rate, this methodology, once elected, must be used consistently for all PCCD subgrant awards until such time as the subgrantee obtains a federally approved indirect rate. So question number 2, are there specific formatting requirements such as page limits, font, spacing, etc. for applications? So all of our applications are submitted again electronically in our PCCD eGrant system. So when you are in a section and responding to questions, just a helpful hint, you're going to notice that on the right side of any text boxes, there's a golden gavel. If you hover your mouse over this gavel, it will provide your information on any character limits that exist for that specific text box. It'll also let you know if a response to that text box is required. Third frequently asked question, and again, this was previously addressed by Kathy when talking about the eligible and ineligible expenses and costs. So are gift cards and or stipends allowable expenses? So unfortunately, the answer here is no. Both gift cards and client stipends are ineligible costs for federal state crisis intervention program funds as established by BJA. So as such, unfortunately, again, both are listed in the ineligible program activities and expenses section of the funding announcement. And so I'm also now going to loop in Sam here, as I do see we have a few questions that have come in from the chat.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sam Cook. I'm PCCD's Director of Policy and Planning, and happy to serve as your Q&A facilitator for today's online session. So we have gotten a couple of questions so far in today's session. If you have something that you're curious about, would strongly encourage you to utilize the Q&A feature at this time to enter in any questions that you'd like our team to address. If we can't fully address them today verbally during the webinar, our team will certainly take those questions we received today and answer them offline, and all questions that we answer verbally or otherwise will be available in the Q&A document that Michael and others have been referencing today. So the first question that we've received so far was asking to clarify research question 3. So Kathy, I'm going to punt this one to you, but to help you as well as our fellow listeners who may not have the funding announcement up, I'll just read what that research question 3 entails just for a quick reference. So, and again, these can be found on page 7 of the funding announcement. So question 3 is, how do the weapons relinquishment provisions of Act 79 impact PFAs entered by agreement between parties? Where agreement is reached for entry of a final PFA between the parties as opposed to after a hearing by the court, how often is weapons relinquishment a factor in the negotiation? So Kathy, would you be able to maybe share a little bit of kind of what this question means, maybe how it ties to some of what we're seeing in Act 79 implementation and kind of what we're curious about from that perspective?
Sure. So one of the parts of Act 79 basically says that a final protection from abuse order can be entered into by a consent agreement. So that's an agreement between the parties. And as part of that consent agreement, it says it may order the defendant to relinquish firearms and weapons and ammunition. So what we're curious about is, how does that negotiation impact whether weapons are being relinquished or not, and what factors actually impact that? So this goes back to the safety and security of victims and survivors as part of the PFA Act, and how does that impact that type of negotiation during that phase? If you need additional clarification, please just ask a little bit more in there, and we will be able to answer those questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
So the second question we got is one that I think I could actually answer. So I'll spare our presenters having to speak more than they already have today, but they can jump in if I miss anything. So this individual is asking, are researchers expected to conduct qualitative research in each Pennsylvania county or a sample of counties? So the answer to that is a sample of counties. We certainly recognize that that's not going to be research that's feasible to do fully statewide. So as Kathy mentioned before, we would be expecting an approved applicant to work closely with our team, as well as the researchers at the Indiana University of Pennsylvania who helped do some analysis of our PFA database to determine a representative kind of approach to sample sampling counties for that qualitative research project. So Kathy, anything you'd want to kind of add to that? I know I said I'd spare your vocal cords.
No, I think you covered it, Sam.
Perfect. All right, so another question that we received was whether it's possible to get access to IUP's figure data in narrative or table form. So I may need a follow-up clarification from this individual, and feel free to send an email to our team as well if that would be helpful. I do want to note the research, quantitative research that Kathy was walking through earlier. That is available in full form from a study that was published a couple of months ago from our team. If you go on the gun violence section of PCCD's website, you'll see a data and research tab, and there is a link to that full study. We would certainly expect in the awarded stage to be sharing and working quite closely with the selected entity, and that could include sharing even more data potentially than what is publicly available in that research report. So happy to provide additional information to that individual who asked that question if that doesn't quite clarify, but I think the long story short is a yes to that question. So the next question we received was, what was the rationale for funding the quantitative and qualitative work separately and not as a single award? And will IUP be applying for the qualitative work as an incumbent? So in terms of rationale, one of the things that our team started with was we had access to the PFA database, and I'll let Kathy maybe jump in on some of the rationale of this as well, but we actually used our Statistical Analysis Center funds as Pennsylvania's Statistical Analysis Center, as the grant name suggests, and so IUP researchers help our team at PCCD. They're our contracted research staff, so they were able to dig in and provide some really good research on the quantitative side that actually was spurred by a report of recommendations that came out in 2020 as part of our special counsel on gun violence. And so their task was really, I think, to investigate and explore just what that data set included. This was in the early stages of Act 79 implementation. And so that data set really provided a lot of really rich data to work from. But as Kathy mentioned, we did encounter some questions resulting from that quantitative analysis that we felt were best in hands of qualitative researchers. So Kathy, I don't know if you'd want to add maybe a little bit more on kind of how we're sort of thinking that the quantitative and qualitative would sort of pair together here for folks who may be curious about that.
Yeah, so sure. So the quantitative analysis really does provide a lot of data, a lot of numbers, but when it comes down to it, we still needed to get other questions answered, such as, well, how often are those weapons relinquished within that 24-hour period? And if they're not relinquished within that 24-hour period, how long afterwards are they? And how does victims, and how do the domestic violence victims, how do they know when their weapons are relinquished? Are they informed of this? So there's a lot of other anecdotal or qualitative research that needs to happen in order to connect the dots about the implementation. And what we also know is that there's a variation on how that implementation has occurred from county to county. So we wanted to take this opportunity to use the quantitative analysis to really enhance a robust qualitative analysis that really closes the gap and provides us with more answers to those questions that came out of the quantitative analysis. We couldn't do one and both at the same time. One is informing the second one, so that's why they were done separately.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. And I will just add too that our contracted research staff from IUP who are embedded with PCCD, they do amazing work on the quantitative side. That's really their bread and butter. But they'll be the first to admit that qualitative research really is not kind of the primary focus of what they do day to day. And so that's another reason why we're looking to really expand that research capacity for this particular area. To understand, as Kathy mentioned, maybe some of the process related pieces that are are influencing some of those numbers that our data wizards were able to kind of glean from that initial analysis. We did receive another question. I think, Kathy, I'll ask to have you piggyback on this one as well. But Debbie asks, is there a ballpark estimate regarding the number of counties that the applicant should plan to use or base the qualitative data collection and analysis on? It's a great question. I would say, we certainly recognize that it will be important to have geographic diversity, making sure that we're capturing different types of counties within that qualitative analysis. And we certainly are deferring a bit to the expertise of the research entities that are coming in for funds to sort of design the scope of what they think would be appropriate to address the research questions. But I think making sure that there's a variety of settings that are captured within that project design would be important from PCCD's perspective. We do not have a specific minimum number of counties in mind, other than probably more than one. But I don't know, Kathy, if there's other things you'd want to maybe jump in with there to kind of help clarify that from that perspective.
Yeah, we definitely want to mix with urban and rural counties. As you know, there's going to be a lot of law enforcement agencies in a more urban type of county. So that goes back to how are the various types of law enforcement agencies actually implementing this? And how does that compare to maybe a rural county that has just the state police coverage, or maybe 3 or 4 different law enforcement agencies? And then looking at the various types of victim service agencies that are involved as well. We will probably, I think it might be good, and you would not know this information, but there's also a lethality assessment program, better known as LAP, that is implemented in a number of the counties. So I think it'll be interesting to even look at data with those counties that have implemented the LAP. That could be phase 2, but I think a minimum of counties we would be flexible on. But as Sam said, more than one. I would say more like 5 or 6, probably somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah, and we're spread out, right? So I would
Right.
say, obviously recognizing that some of that might impact project costs, but I think we'd also be expecting that, counties wouldn't necessarily be clustered kind of in a single region. I think there's an argument to be made that Pennsylvania is actually kind of like multiple states all in one. And so just making sure that the analysis that's produced kind of reflects the great diversity and variation that our Commonwealth has in terms of just the landscape of different communities, and to Kathy's point, the landscape of available programs and services. That does it for the submitted questions. A reminder that you can also email our team with other questions that you may have. We would be more than happy to answer them in that venue. I'm going to turn things back over to Michael Leister to close us out for today.
Well, thank you, Sam. And again, thank you everyone for your submitted questions. Again, if you do have follow-up questions, you can feel free to submit those to our resource account by July 3rd is the cutoff date. Again, please keep an eye out on that Q&A document as we will update it as any questions come in. And we look forward to you all submitting your applications by 11:59 p.m. on July 9th, 2024. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great day.